talking about reparations, talking about apartheid. You, Dennis Brutus, spent time with Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. You were imprisoned,
right.
broke rocks together.
That's right.
You have seen the latest news of President Mandela coming to the United States, the former president of South Africa. He met with President Bush. Your thoughts on this? I know there was some concern among activist groups to give President Bush that kind of seal of approval.
There's a very striking difference between the Mandela, who was quite blunt in his criticism, not only of the U.S. entry into Iraq, but also the election itself. So we had some very frank speaking at that time. And surprisingly, now we find Mandela visiting with President Bush and saying, oh, well, friends have this way of criticizing each other. So in a sense, he's climbing down from his previous criticism. And I suppose the explanation is that when he came to the United States, it was mainly in order to raise funds for one of the Mandela foundations. So it seems to me being very polite, I would say excessively polite. And indeed, for people who knew him as someone who spoke out bluntly, this is not only a surprise, it's also a disappointment. We think he should have maintained his position.
Well, what about Mandela's power today and President Bush's relationship with him and the current president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki?
Generally, Mandela has chosen to take the role of an elder statesman and to be fairly soft-spoken. On the other hand, as we know, that George Bush has been very cordial towards Thabo Mbeki, the new president, and indeed has called Mbeki his point man in Africa when it comes to questions like Zimbabwe. So there's a much warmer relationship between Thabo Mbeki and President Bush. Mandela was rather more distant, so it's a little surprising that he's now being more cordial, and as I say, the explanation is probably that he came on an enormous fundraising venture, met with some of the big corporations, especially the arms industry, and that explains the change, I suppose.